composed of select members from the Transportation, Public Transit, and Street Safety Committee, Parks, Recreation, Beautification Committee, and the Land Use, Housing, and Landmark Committee. The proposed projects for this thoroughfare create an intersectionality that requires this unique approach. We are also joined tonight by members from the three committees I have previously mentioned tonight. As a reminder to the public, this project is being built on city-owned land. This means that this board, our board, does not get a vote on this project, unlike land use and zoning requests that come before this board that we would vote and then our vote would go on through a process. There is no process for this. So the city, because it owns the property, can deem what they believe is appropriate and best fit for the community in which that property rests. This is why this meeting tonight is so important. It gives us an opportunity as a board to learn about the project and scrutinize the project and ask questions so that we have a better idea of this particular project that's coming to the community. Our power comes in the amount of scrutiny and the amount of answers that we're able to get, and at the end of the day, we win by understanding the project at its fullest. As a matter of housekeeping tonight, this is a business meeting of this committee and not a town hall. We will receive a presentation and then proceed into an extensive Q&A. We will entertain questions in the following order. First, from the members of the Select Committee for the Rockaway Beach Branch right-of-way. It's a mouthful, and they're all sitting up here in the front. And then we'll take questions from the additional board members, and should time allow, we will take questions from the public. This meeting is set to conclude around 9:15 p.m. because we do have a curfew, so we will have to be out of here by 9:30. And please understand, disruptions will not be tolerated during the presentation or the Q&A section of this meeting. We fully appreciate that there are diverse perspectives in this room, but we need to remain respectful of one another. I want to now introduce to you the chair. I'm the chair of Community Board 6, but I'm not the chair of this committee, so I'm going to set myself down, and I'm going to turn this over to our chair of this select committee, and he is also our second vice chair of the Community Board, Keith Engel.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am Keith Engel. I'm the chair of this particular committee. Again, welcome to meeting number 2 of the Select Committee on the Rockaway Beach right-of-way. So for our meeting tonight, we are actually joined by representatives of the New York City Economic Development Council. I'm going to be hearing a presentation on the Queensway project. Now, I've been following this project for about 10 years since it first kind of came out, kind of like post-Highline landscape, so I'm excited to hear what this might be about. And I just want to thank Heather for going through the run of show in terms of the approach, in terms of like the members that are joining us tonight, and how we're going to proceed. So I will note to my committee that we do have quorum this evening. So if we do deem it appropriate to make a recommendation, we can totally do so. And with that, I just want to thank our guests from EDC and turn it over to them for the presentation tonight. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
I can just stand here so that I'm addressing, oh, okay, awesome. Thank you, yeah. Everyone can hear me now, perfect. Yeah, I'll just stand right about here so I'm addressing both the audience and the board. My name is Angie Espino. I'm a senior project manager with the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Thank you, Keith, thank you, Heather. Not sure if Frank is here tonight, but also thank you to Frank for having us, getting us on the agenda for tonight. We at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, we are a nonprofit that works in all 5 boroughs of New York City. We really focus on building the growth of equitable and sustainable neighborhoods in New York City, and we do that through a couple of different ways, whether that's driving business growth in New York City, investing in sustainable infrastructure in different boroughs, and just making sure that the neighborhoods in New York City become places where residents can work, play, live, and really just looking at the future of different neighborhoods in all different pockets of New York City. So tonight, as both Keith and Heather have mentioned, I wanted to bring a bit of an update on specifically the Metropolitan Hub portion of the Queensway. Just about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, the city provided or invested in, committed $35 million to this first portion of the larger right-of-way. And so we really just wanted to come out here and really hear from the different pockets of communities that have come out. My understanding is that this community board is very active, that this community itself is very active. So I also want to thank everyone for being here tonight with us. And so if we can go on to the next slide, I do have an agenda here. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the background of this site, but for those of us who are new, if any, we did want to provide some context and some background to this project in general, and then make our way into sort of the history of the Queensway. Again, I'm sure many of you are familiar, but again, just for those of us who are new here. And then I do want to talk about the previous advocacy and engagement that that this city has seen for this project specifically, and then sort of zoom in on the Metropolitan Hub itself, kind of where the city is in this section of the Queensway, and go over some of the agency roles. I'm joined here with the New York City Parks Department as well, and a couple someone from our capital program at NYCDC, Meredith. And so, we just want to make sure that we are updating everyone as to what we've been up to since that 2022 announcement, and really kind of just start hearing, those voices again, as I mentioned. So next slide. So hard to see a little, but really quickly, this is a former Long Island Railroad branch, the Rockaway Beach branch. It connected Rego Park, Ozone Park, went all the way down to Far Rockaway. In about 1952, the Long Island Railroad Service did, it came across a couple of different points in its lifetime. There was a fire that broke out, and also they were starting to see very low ridership, so they did decide to end that service, and then it was. And then the city acquired that land and converted the southern section into the A line, which takes us today to Far Rockaway. And then, due to the two pretty big milestones that happened in the lifetime of the LIRR, Rockaway Beach branch, they decided to abandon all service in the northern section. And so that really is what brings us here today, right? There is an abandoned right-of-way, an abandoned rail line. It is currently under New York City jurisdiction, as Heather pointed out earlier. It's under city ownership. About 39 acres fall under DCAS jurisdiction, and the remainder does fall with the New York City Department of Parks. And so that's really just another reason why we're excited to be here today too, right? We want to talk about the possibilities of this line, and really take a look into what the city has been up to since the announcement. And so if we move on to the next slide, I did want to give a really quick project history on the Queensway. So that was a proposed 3.5-mile linear park and greenway that has Forest Park at its heart. And so in 2011, the Friends of the Queensway was born, and they entered a partnership with Trust for Public Land. So Friends of the Queensway is a very local group. It brought a bunch of community members along the right-of-way to kind of get their thoughts going on what the possibilities of this line could be. And Trust for Public Land is a nonprofit that really advocates for parks and open space in New York State. And so, they teamed up together, and they, started to develop a plan for this site. 2014 comes and Friends of the Queenway does receive a grant from the New York State Parks and the Regional Development Council. And so with that money, they commissioned Trust for Public Land to really analyze the challenges and opportunities that the community had here to reactivate this or to kind of bring about a new future for this abandoned lot, right? And so together they were able to come up with the design for the first half mile of the Queensway, which is the metropolitan hub. So that's really just giving us some history on what the Queensway is in general, kind of how it was born, and on the next slide we do want to point out that there has been previous engagement and advocacy that we've heard, and that's really from the work that Trust for Public Land and Friends of the Queensway were able to do, not only with that grant money, but with all of the support that they were seeing in the communities along the railway. And so, we can't really talk about this project without acknowledging that there has been previous advocacy and that a plan really came out of all of this advocacy. And some common themes were seen in these different kind of touch points in the community. Anything from a bike and a pedestrian path, outdoor classroom space, landscaping and garden areas. That's definitely what the previous engagement and community workshops saw. And what I really wanted to focus on today was again, hearing the voices of these different communities, but also really zooming in on the Metropolitan Hub itself as the opportunity to continue this engagement and really start to hear from folks what you want to see out here, right? So on the next slide, I do just want to circle back to that mayoral announcement last year, right? $35 million were committed to the first section called the Metropolitan Hub. This is north of Union Turnpike. It's between Union Turnpike and Metropolitan Avenue, right adjacent to the Metropolitan High School, the Metropolitan High School complex. And so, we are, what this money is for is for the design and construction of the Metropolitan Hub. So really, again, a commitment to have this first phase really built out. And the overall and very broad goals of the Metropolitan Hub is to really turn it into new open space, right? 0.7 miles of greenway, improved access to different recreational amenities, different outdoor education opportunities for the high school that is right next to it, and also providing that safe transportation corridor. I know there's a lot of bus lines that are right next to this portion of the larger Rockaway Beach branch, and so definitely want to make this section very usable for the community, and also very accessible to all of the different sorts of parts of the community that already exist, right? The Metropolitan Avenue small businesses that are right there. Again, Mel's High School that's there, really seeing how we can activate this area. And so on the next slide, we also do want to point out that there are renderings out there, right? And that is thanks to, again, the Trust for Public Land, Friends of the Queensway. But we do just want to point out that this has been, there has been previous activity and engagement and advocacy for this portion of the Rockaway Beach branch. And so, we can't really do this presentation without really, touching on that previous engagement. And on the next slide, really kind of brings us to the update portion of what the city has been up to since 2022, right? Since that announcement. So the Metropolitan Hub will be a public park, right? So it will be maintained and operated by the New York City Parks Department. That's why we have them here with us today. And what EDC's role is to really manage that construction, right? So we're partnering with the city agency, and since 2022, we've been able to retain a consultant. So we've been able to retain design consultant Techno and landscape architect Sasaki. And what we've been doing since then is really just working to advance the design, the TPL designs, and bringing them to park standards, right? With any city park, there has to be sort of it has to be operable and maintainable by the Parks Department. And so we want to make sure that we're really getting to those standards and making this a usable park, right? Very realistic park that people will eventually be using in the community and in neighboring communities. And in the next slide, I did want to touch on some next steps, right? So as I mentioned, we are just starting to really ramp up kind of the larger discussion for what the community wants to see in this first section of the larger abandoned rail line. And so we are currently developing preliminary designs. Our landscape architects, our consultants are developing preliminary design concepts. They will have to go through the New York City Parks internal review, but also through the Public Design Commission review. And so we're really working to mainly gather this input, this feedback, to essentially take us to that final, to the finish line of design, right? And so we are planning a more public community workshop where we can start to talk about what this site can look like, right? What kind of programming we can get there, and we definitely want to hear from all the different voices that not only have come out here today, but who live right in the vicinity of where the Met Hub will be. And with that, we'll be able to then come to the community board with more updates on design, really kind of get some more thoughts, more input, and then really take us to that final, the Public Design Commissioner review, which we would estimate would be in about early 2024. And so that's really what the city has been working on since we've gotten that commitment from the New York City mayor. And I really, again, thank everyone for coming here. I think it's really important to be able to, be in person and, hear what everyone has to say, any thoughts or feedback at this point. Because again, as I said, we are going to start to ramp up that engagement and kind of build off of what has been heard in the past, right? Which is that this is an abandoned railway, has been abandoned for quite some time, and now with this commitment, with this funding, really kind of seeing what this new vision can look like for the Met Hub and for this area of Queens. And the last slide really just has my contact information, and we can really get into any questions right now. But you can always reach out to me as well. And thank you so much.
I just want to thank you for that, and I think we can probably go to questions at this point, right? From the committee first.
Any questions at this point? Okay. Okay, we have. I'm gonna keep a list for Keith. Pedro. I have Peter. Any questions will spawn questions. So when there is a select committee member that does have a question, we will defer to them first and then jump back to you. So Pedro.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I guess I'll start with the elephant in the room, which is the Queens Link. I guess my question really is to you, because I know you're not part of the Queens Link. I know that's not what you're working on. But is the city and is the EDC doing anything specifically to ensure that in the future, if the MTA does get its act together and does decide to add a subway, that this would not impede that?
Yeah, I feel like, can everyone hear me at this point? That's a really great question, Pedro, really appreciate it. And I do want to point out a few things with that, with, like you said, the elephant in the room, right? The Queenslink. First and foremost, our scope of work today is mainly on the Metropolitan Hub, right? That is what the funding is for today. That is what we have approvals to really see through today. And so, really, with any MTA proposal, we would essentially need a commitment from MTA in order to really consider, any sort of transit activity on the Metropolitan Hub site, right? So that's kind of what our, our main focus is for right now. There hasn't been a state commitment, there hasn't been an MTA commitment, there's no funding for the Queenslink, and so, we would want to focus on what we can control today, which is, the Metropolitan Hub and what the community wants to see here in this first section.
My question is more like, is there some, are you guys aware that it is possible for the state to do, for the state to do this? And are you actively trying to make sure that you don't impede it, or are you just not considering it at all?
Yeah, I mean, and so are you asking more, is like, are we like, I don't know, like in conversation with the MTA or I mean,
more like from a project point of view, like again, you're the expert at this, but if you're aware that this is a possibility, then maybe you will say like, okay, maybe let's do this, so that in the future this could be dug out, versus just like, oh, I'm not even considering.
Is your design team taking it into consideration?
yeah, and okay, yeah, I understand the question now. Thank you. So like I mentioned, it really is sort of a call that the MTA would have to make on their end. I know that they have previously reported that this is, or that the Queenslink is not feasible for all of their different reasons. And so, we can't essentially, work on the Metropolitan Hub, again, without that real commitment, that real funding that they would need to have in place before we can even start to see, like where the line could be activated again.
It sounds like no.
Angie, I'll just jump in.
Oh, yeah.
Mitchell Loring from New York City Parks. We are in communication with MTA Construction Development. We don't have a schematic design ready yet because we're still creating that, but we will be coordinating with them when we have it and seeing what they have to do.
Okay, I have, Peter, you had a question?
Yes, but if John's on your,
No, he's not.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, so-
Okay, John and then Karen.
Good evening, and thank you very much for the presentation. Do you know why was the Metro Hub chosen as the first part of this to be done, as opposed to, say, closer to the junction with the main line, where there's a large tract of land that, I might be wrong, but I don't think would conflict with the Queenslink if it was developed now, whereas the Metro Hub comes into direct conflict with those plans, which in the planning stages, Metrolink is still, Queenslink is still probably a few years behind this. So why the Metro Hub as opposed to some other section that could have been done instead and allowed time for Queenslink development to catch up to determine whether it was feasible or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it has to do with a couple of different parts. As we all know, this is all city-owned land, so it is. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Can we give her the mic for a minute? Yeah. And then board members, just, can y'all put on your mama papa voices and just, because we really need to have, because we're recording this, so we really want to be able to hear from
Sorry
you.
about that.
No, don't be
Thank
sorry. No,
you.
we have 3 mics, it's just due to technical stuff tonight, 2 of them have decided to be petulant and not work, so.
No worries,
We're
tech
working with
problems.
one.
Got it, no worries. Yeah, so as I was saying, a couple of different points to that question.
as we all know, this is all city-owned land, so it'll be easily, or it can be, city agencies doing work on it is, I don't want to say it's going to be easier, but it's definitely, we won't have to jump through as many sort of hoops as if this was on, publicly or privately owned property or residential and whatnot. And so, I guess the focus on the Met Hub is that there were, as I mentioned in the presentation, Trust for Public Land and Friends of the Queensway had come up with a design and proposal for it already. And so really we are working to use kind of what was seen in that process, but just really bring it up to park standard, right, and city standards for what parks usually do in the city.
Has EDC or Parks given any consideration, though, to choosing a different site to begin the work so that it wouldn't be in conflict with other proposals that are still under development?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, the real focus is where we have the funding and approvals for today, which is the Metropolitan Hub. The other parts of the rest of the plan don't have that funding, don't have that approval, and so it's really, as I mentioned, what we can control today, which is the Metropolitan Hub section.
Next is John. Okay, I'm going to read the order I have right now. John, Karen, Keith, Edgar, and then Mark. John, you're up. Nice and loud. She's keeping the mic. She's going to keep. Oh.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you. Okay. First of all, I do think probably one of the reasons why you picked the site you have, which was a relatively short area between Union Turnpike and Metro, is that you would not be running into the kind of conflicts with the adjacent. Clearly, if you went south, you would have the whole problem with the people in the Crescent and going through their parking lot, and there'd be other things in the north. So I can understand that, and this would give you an opportunity to show how the project would work, and you could use it as a model. What I would be interesting is, have you thought of, if this is basically stage one, and I hope you look at it as stage one, where would you see stage two? Have you given any thought of that? Because clearly that would be something where we would have to deal with. As part of Community Board 6s, if you went north between Metro and the main line, you would clearly have to deal with us and other community boards. But have you thought of this as, have you thought beyond just doing this at the current time? And that's basically mine. And if so, where would you see the next stage being?
Sure, I'll have Mitchell.
Thank you. So, as Angie has kind of mentioned, it partially depends on just if there is support for a phase two and where that support is coming from and what money is allocated, because the different segments would probably cost different amounts based on what the complexities are. But from the Parks Department perspective, our preference for the next phase to focus on would be the section that's in the cut within Forest Park itself to help connect those two and to improve portions of Forest Park in the process.
And if so, what would your plans be in that little barrier between like the Crescent apartments? Would you consider, for example, basically reducing the size to say a bike path and a pedestrian path to limit the amount of impact it would have, or have you thought that through?
We haven't gotten there yet. We're just focused on designing this phase for now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Karen, then Keith.
Thank you for the presentation. And also just for the board's conflict of interest. I have an affiliation with Friends of the Queensway, so just want to put that out front.
But she does not have. She's declaring her volunteer work, but I want to understand that we have spoken to the Conflicts of Interest Board, and she has been fully clear to participate in this process, and we did that early on.
Thank you.
So just wanted to make that clear that
So
yes.
for the record, to
yes.
correct, I have volunteered with Friends of the Queensway.
Yes.
Thank you, Heather.
Welcome.
One question about more like the practicality. What are the site conditions like at phase one? What is it actually, what is there, right? How difficult or easy is it to work on it? And what do you see as like actually some of the practical potential opportunities, whether it's green infrastructure or shading or other things that would not just contribute to like public gathering and moving back and forth, but like other co-benefits? That's part one. And then part two is, given some of the questions actually that John posed about going north or going south and concerns that we've heard, what are some of the best practices that you're looking at from these kinds of projects around the country? Because obviously this is not the only Rails to Trails project in this area or in the country and in residential communities, because I think there is a real distinction between this and the High Line. So what kind of best practices are you learning about as you look at some other examples from around the country?
So first to the context of the site for the Metropolitan Hub, I think the main feature is that we're talking about an elevated embankment that's somewhat narrow. Is it like 80 feet about? Around there. That's the primary condition. There is a second portion of it that is between the Montauk branch of the Long Island Railroad and Union Turnpike, where there is also a large paved parking lot behind the commercial buildings there that's also city-owned land. So those are the two main site conditions right now. As far as examples and precedents, I'm actually the project manager at Parks on a similar project where we're constructing a new greenway in the Bronx that was in the former Putnam Railroad, part of New York Central Railroad long ago. This is an extension out of Van Cortlandt Park, south into the neighborhood of Kingsbridge. That's instead of an elevated corridor, it's in a sunken corridor that's kind of wedged between commercial and residential buildings off of Broadway in the Bronx and the major Deegan Expressway on the other side. So it has a lot of similarities in the fact that the grade of that future greenway corridor is not the same as the existing street network immediately adjacent to it. It has hemmed in uses, or the uses around it hem it in, and we're also including a stream in that project as well. So, another kind of site factor that makes it challenging and forces us to think creatively about how to design these spaces where we're constrained in a tight linear fashion. Did I get all your questions?
Yeah, maybe just one just to go back to the initial question, is that based on the current site conditions, have you gotten far enough to consider, any things related to vegetation or green infrastructure? Is it too early at this stage to comment on that?
I can speak a bit to that. My name is Meredith Simon Pearson, and I'm the project director from our capital program at EDC. And just to go back to the current condition of the site, especially in that embankment area, because it has been untouched for such a long amount of time, there are many, many established trees, which are such an asset to that site. And so we have been keeping that in mind when thinking about our design. How can we preserve those trees and keep that beautiful tree canopy? It really is. I was up there a few weeks ago, and it is a special place. You're on the street and it's loud and there's a lot going on, and then you get up there and you're in these trees and there's birds up there. And so we are thinking about keeping that special quality, but we're not far enough along in our design to be thinking specifically about green infrastructure or anything like that.
Next up is Keith. Your microphone.
So thank you very much for that. I had a few questions, I guess, stemming from, next steps, and Nikki mentioned that we have a number of public members here tonight. I think I just want to know a bit more about, you mentioned that you'll be seeking a public input around, I believe, fall of 24, if that's correct. I'm very glad to hear this, just that you're kind of like reaching out to the public to gain insights and perspective into what the community might want to see. I'm curious though, given that you're in schematic design, you've obviously kind of considered some elements of programming. Curious to hear what do you have in mind at this initial stage? And because you also mentioned synergies with area schools, which I think we'd be curious to hear about. It's kind of a tripartite question. Also, what would this workshop look like? Would it be several? Would it be on the weekends? Would it be, how open and accommodating would it be for members of the public to actually be able to join? like obviously not on a Tuesday at 3 p.m. or something like that, but this is more logistics. And also, since I am an architect, I can't help but ask, what is your, I guess, timeline for construction documents, bid, things of that nature? Just like looking at a little bit at a longer view as to when this might actually kind of hit the ground, so to speak.
Pass it over to Mitchell again.
So the community input will occur before fall 2024, likely later this fall or maybe early this winter. And I think a distinction that's important here is how this is similar to a regular parks project and how it's not. And how it's not similar is that typically we don't have groups like TPL, Friends of the Queensway, that are able to get grants and advance like a conceptual design to the level that it has before, which means that we got that and we kind of were unpacking it and remaking it to make sure it works for the agency. And so a lot of the thinking was already there before we got to the point of having a schematic design ready to take to public input, because the normal way a parks project would happen on, say, a completely new piece of land that's undeveloped is that we would do that thinking ourselves internally first, come up with a schematic, and then the first time anybody really heard about the idea would be at the public scoping, public input meeting, where we would show them, this is what we think we should do with the space, and now we want to hear from the community, what do you think about it, how should we change this? So that's what we're getting ready for in the next couple of months, is to have that schematic level design public input meeting. It's just a bit funny with this project because there had been so much past advocacy work done by other groups that makes it seem like perhaps this project has been planned and designed for a very long time, but from an official city perspective, we're kind of just getting to that early point now. And sorry, I forgot your other questions.
Just overall
Timeline for...
like construction documents, updating, just like the longer view.
You want to take that?
Sure. So as Mitchell and Angie have said, we've really just been kicking off design. So we're looking at PDC early 2024 and final design in early 2025.
Okay, Edgar. And Edgar, welcome to your first community board meeting. Please get out.
Thanks for showing up here to talk to the community. The first thing I thought of, the bike paths. So I don't know if you folks are familiar with nearby Forest Park, but there's this nice paved road there, and it's great because it's just easy to take a stroller up there or whatever. But unfortunately, I think a lot of motorists or motor vehicles use that paved road. That makes it a little unsafe. So I want to know if, like, from a design perspective, are there any features or considerations for that in terms of like keeping the bike lanes limited to just bicycles and not motorcycles?
Thanks. So yes, this is, as I mentioned, I'm managing a different project, a greenway in the Bronx. I'm kind of in the Parks Planning Office, the greenway guy, you could say. A lot of our greenway thinking comes through me, and this is a challenge citywide, particularly as different kinds of motorized and electric vehicles come in all different kinds of shapes and sizes now. It's something that we don't have a very clear answer for that we could apply in every single case exactly the same way, because what we don't want to do is put up bollards or fences of some sort that would then prevent, say, a regular bicycle that has like a child cargo attachment so a parent could bike with their kids in tow too. That, the size and the width of that might be prevented from accessing a greenway where we put something that was intended to prevent a motorbike from coming in, but we don't want to prevent those kind of vehicles or even someone in a wheelchair. Some of those kinds of access control features just restrict the space too much. So again, we're early at the design for this project. We haven't gotten all of our access points and how those will be shaped figured out just yet, but this is like a problem that I am thinking about every day, trying to figure out what the answer is. And to be honest, right now we don't have a good answer without restricting other users. So it kind of goes more to better enforcement, better signage, etc. for the time being until someone comes up with a brilliant idea.
So actually, I have two questions. Number one, you said in the presentation that part of this land is owned by DCAS and another part is owned by Parks. I'm just curious to know which sections are owned by Parks and which sections are owned by DCAS. So that's my first question. Second question, I actually live in Regal Park Crescents. This is one of the distinctions between the crescents that John was talking about. Now, where I live, you can look outside my window, and I actually face the Forest Hills Little League. And that particular strip, I know it's not involved in the Metro Hub, and I know there's been a whole bunch of questions that have come up, not necessarily focused on the Metro Hub, but I guess what we're concerned about is, obviously Metro Hub is the first step. And then if you're gonna get to my part, I see a lot of challenges in my part. So I don't know if you've even looked at that. I mean, I can tell you that that particular strip behind my building is very narrow. I mean, literally, it's just probably about 10 feet across. So, and I think probably when the Long Island Railroad existed, I don't think the Little League existed. So I have a feeling the Little League might have encroached a little bit on that piece. So I guess I'm just bringing it to your attention because even whatever happens in Metro Hub, I assume it's going to be extended to where we are. And I just have a lot of questions about what you're going to do with that in terms from a Queensway perspective.
So just to answer the jurisdiction question first, the entire corridor it's all owned by the city again, but in the jurisdiction of DCAS, all of the sections north of where the A train runs, except for the portion that's within Forest Park, that portion is under the jurisdiction of the Parks Department. And to answer your second question, again, we're only focused on the design for Met Hub right now. We're working on that, and we haven't gotten into the details of the other phases yet. So I think you were talking about a section. I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand where you were referencing.
I guess it's second to the northern part.
If it's north of Metropolitan or south of Union Turnpike, we haven't gotten to the design of it yet.
North, it's not far from here actually. It starts at 63rd Drive and Alderton Street. And Alderton Street is a crescent-shaped street that runs, that's kind of like the backbone of the crescents. So
That's not in the design right now.
I understand,
Yeah, okay.
but my question is sooner or later it's gonna get in the design, or I would think you're gonna get to my section. And I guess I just have concerns about what that's gonna look like.
Yeah, we're not there yet, but just like this section, how I mentioned that we'll be doing a community input meeting, part of Parks' normal kind of scoping process for a new park site. If and when we have funding for any other sections and design starts, we'd be doing the same thing. We'd be taking each piece as an individual project, as if it was a new park that's being built, and doing the regular community input, community scoping, public design review process for each phase. So once we got there, we'd have a meeting where we would want to hear those concerns.
I know that spot. It's a challenge. It's gonna be a challenge, no matter what happens with that spot. So just, okay. I understand you're not there.
Okay, next is Latrice.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Latrice Davis. I am not a member of the Select Committee per se, but I am a member of the Land Use, Housing, Landmarks Committee and the Transportation Street Safety Committee. My comment / question to you folks is regarding partnerships. You mentioned that the land is managed by Parks Department and DCAS. What role, if any, will DCAS have in, once you get to the final stages of what you're doing? Because it sounds to me like your mission, Parks Department, and what DCAS does, to my understanding, are two different things. Also, we talked about, or we alluded to, public-private partnerships, like with the parks. Like Central Park is a public park, but it's managed by the Conservancy, which is privately funded. Same thing with a lot of flagship parks, Flushing Meadows Park, Prospect Park in Brooklyn. So how would that work? Assuming that this Queensway comes to fruition, would that be handled privately or publicly? Would it be a partnership? How would that work? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Portia Dearenforth. I'm the administrator for Forest Park. And so the Metropolitan Hub section of the Queensway would fall into directly to the Parks Department, to New York City Parks. So it would be Forest Park and Highland Park, sister parks, or we do get support from the Forest Park Trust for programming. So this would hopefully get the same kind of support. A lot of that support comes from private funds and also from elected officials. So, but it would be mainly run by the Parks Department, just like many of the other greenways, throughout the city.
Take the microphone back there. Thank you.
Okay, I have a few timeline-related questions. I see on the timeline that there's going to be elected engagement prior to 2024, and I'm thinking that my question is that come January, in late 2023, correct? That's when you're going to be engaging electeds. My question is, in 2024, the entire thoroughfare that the original Queensway design is basically changing hands. Whereas Robert Holden, for example, is a council member at the Forest Crescent's Apartments. That will now be council member Joanne Ariola. Whereas some of the thoroughfare that once you get like into the more Rego Parky kind of sections, like the actual Crescent streets, and then my section of Rego Park, that will then switch over hands from Lynn Schulman to Robert Holden. So will you be including those new stakeholders that are going to be sort of as a result of redistricting? Will they also be included in 2020 in your briefing in 2023? Sorry.
I have a couple. Just stay here. We'll back to you.
Yeah, thanks Heather for the question. So I think a couple of different good points were raised. And to answer your question more broadly, yes, we are, we are going to consider, kind of any sort of political landscape change and any elected official change. Right now, we have been, communicating, of course, with the board, with the current council member, Lynn Schulman, and of course, if anything really does change, as you mentioned, we do plan on going to kind of whichever elected we really need to go to keep in the loop and make sure that all of your questions are answered too, either from them or from us. So I hope that.
The other question I have is, it seems that I've not heard a single mention about an environmental impact study, and I know that the folks from QueensLink have had a letter that has requested throughout the entire ROW. I know that based on earlier studies conducted by Sistra, this was when they were contemplating revitalizing the line for actually transit. There was multiple mentions to many questions that further study, and it all pointed back to what would be gathered in an environmental impact study. Is that a part of your timeline? And if so, when do you think that would happen, and when do you think we would have the results of that study?
Yeah, so this will be going through an environmental study and an environmental review. As for the timing for that study, it does take about a year to complete, and so it would be we would be starting it roughly at the same time as early as next year as well, and probably concluding, and I'm looking at Meredith, concluding by 2025 roughly. So I don't know, yeah, if Meredith wants to speak a little bit more on.
So our engineering and design consultants have already begun investigating and begun the process of environmental review, and the project will go through the seeker process.
Can you say it again, the what process?
The seeker, CEQR.
Thank you. And then just one last question that I have for now, and then I'm going to move on to
Pedro, who's next on my list, is where do you plan, because this is so big, where do you plan to do staging for this project when you start to do the work? Where will you stage the work from? There's been a lot of talk with the other project, concern about, we don't want you to use the ball field. I've heard from people that we don't want you to use Home Depot. And, we're kind of short on big spaces in Queens. So, I mean, in all reality, you're gonna have to use something somewhere and somebody's not going to be content with your choices. So wondering if that's come up in discussion, and if so, kind of where you're looking, give or take, for staging.
I had the same thought when I was on site a couple of weeks ago. Our design consultants, as part of their design, will look into opportunities for staging and phasing. We're working on bringing on a construction manager for the project as well, and we'll bring them in early so that we can, while we're still in the design process, have conversations about staging and phasing.
Got it. So I'm just asking too far ahead.
We're still at the beginning, yeah.
Sorry, forgive me.
No, it's
okay,
fine.
Next up we have Pedro, and then actually I'm gonna take Alicia since she's on the committee, and then I'm gonna tag you up next.
Okay. My question is, how much involvement the park department has right now in this project? Because as you know, the next year budget, they hit the park departments, and they continue the support and that they say they're going to have right now when those budget cuts comes to that areas.
Thank you for the question. I'll pass it over to Mitchell.
We at the Parks Department are fully involved with EDC in the design of the project. Yes, there are tough budget discussions and realities going on right now in the city, but that doesn't mean that there's cuts to full-time park staff that are helping manage the process.
LT, then Pedro. You keep getting knocked down, Elizabeth. I gotcha. LT, go ahead. LT, Pedro, and then I saw him. Gladys.
What are your design priorities for this stage that you're communicating to your design partners?
Design priorities for the
metro.
Okay. Pass that over to Jill.
I guess design priorities, we can answer this in like the kind of priorities that the Parks Department always takes into account, like universal accessibility, fun, joyful experiences, increasing and protecting ecological zones and dense vegetation. But particularly for this kind of project where we're talking about a linear narrow corridor, the primary feature is going to be shared use path, like a bike path, a greenway, walking paths, but there is some additional space north of Union Turnpike in the southern section of this project where there's a lot more width to build upon, and so there will be some different kind of programming nodes that we can work with there, and that's one of the questions that at the upcoming public input opportunities that we really want to hear from people, like what would you like to see in these spaces where we have a little bit more area to maybe do like outdoor classrooms or a playground or other kinds of things that you might find in a typical park.
Okay, next is Pedro, then Gladys, then Karen.
Thank you. So that actually goes into my question. So there's supposed to be a bike path that you guys are considering. This is between Metropolitan and Union Turnpike, but a bike path is only as useful as the network that it connects to. There is no bike path or bike lane on Metropolitan or on Union Turnpike, so I don't know. How do you envision actually people getting there? Does this expand beyond into the actual street themselves? Have you been in talk with DOT about what to do, etc.?
You're right. This area of Queens doesn't have super extensive on-street bike facilities already, but that doesn't mean that it might not in the future. And so we're definitely coordinating with DOT, City DOT early on the design right now, letting them know that we intend to put a bike path through this green space. It's a north-south corridor, and wondering, or we posed the question to them, what do you all envision as the appropriate connections, knowing that our access points can only basically be at Metropolitan and Union Turnpike, we've asked them, hey, please think about it. We're going to keep coordinating with you, and we want to know what you think makes sense for potential upgrades in the neighborhood that would be spurred on by the fact that this project was being constructed. In addition, the school campus that's to the east of the site, Mel's, has a bike lane that's just on the school drive. So we're definitely thinking of this project being able to provide a safer route to school for kids, depending on where they're coming from, a way to get north-south that is not on Woodhaven, for example.
Gladys.
Thank you. I have 3 questions. I wanted to know what the hours of operation will be for the park once it's open. Also, how would you guarantee or what's going to happen regarding the safety of the park goers? If it's not open 24 hours, if there are people that are going to have access in the evenings, and once it's open, like the High Line, where they have small vendors, I hear a lot of education and other things, but will that be an opportunity also for small businesses to open and operate there?
So, sure. So I think the hours would, something, we could discuss within the community. I think it would most likely mirror like park hours, like Forest Park, which is, open at 6 a.m. and closes at 10 p.m. I don't envision this having probably gates or anything, but we could make it lockable. Obviously, it's an area just like the park that would be patrolled by the Park Enforcement Patrol and also by NYPD. And, when situations arise, like, just try to engage NYPD and Park Enforcement to come and try to patrol it. We would definitely be open to, opportunities for maybe some kind of, activities, definitely free activities, within the nodes, whether that's with the parks and, the recreation division or doing some kind of other kind of programming that, that's another kind of feedback we'd love to hear, at the community engagement to see, what else we could program here besides for just being, a greenway. And also working with the school, hopefully.
The access point, or rather the overpass by the school, is that being considered as a potential access point in addition to the other side on Union? That's the first question. And the second question, just to get your thinking about, and maybe for folks here who may not be familiar with the whole master plan around the concept of like hub linear passage, because it does sort of create a distinction in terms of what this is, rather than just one straight linear path, the nodes that you mentioned. So maybe just to like elaborate a little bit on like the hub aspect of this first piece. Like how would you gain entry into this half mile, right? So there's two sides of it. There's like the Union by the Stop and Shop side, and then the high school side. Would there be entry into this half mile from both ends? So what I'm thinking of is on Metropolitan by the high school. Yes. That's where the overpass is. Would there be an entry like by the car wash area there, potentially? And would there be another entry point on the other side? Okay.
So yes, we're envisioning currently, which we're hoping to share soon, an access point from Metropolitan Avenue by the car wash, and then another one on the school side of Metropolitan. Sorry, remind me your second question.
The second question has to do with like how you would distinguish what is a hub versus kind of like a linear passage.
So not being involved in the past planning of the full Queensway division, I think you're referring to a concept that might have been highlighted in that work. And so I can't speak entirely to what thinking went into that, but what I understand is that a hub area is where there's more space, width to make other kinds of programming nodes besides just the linear path system. And so in the Metropolitan Hub project, there is that space available north of Union Turnpike. So we're focusing on additional programming space there. If and when there was funding for any other sections of the project, we would look to do similar types of additional programming opportunities wherever the width allows, which, as it sounds like you know, it varies throughout the length of the corridor. But again, we're only designing this section right now. We don't have any funding or any mandate to focus on any other sections.
Next is Latrice, then Keith, then myself. Anyone else want to get in the queue? Okay, we'll see.
All right, just real quick, it's more of a comment than a question. I just want to touch on something Gladys just mentioned that kind of, caught my attention about putting a gate in the park. Being that it's a public park, I would hate to see Queensway turn into something like Gramercy Park. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with how Gramercy Park is set up in Manhattan, but I don't want to see that. So I just want to put that on the record. Thank you.
And I don't think that's the intention whatsoever.
No,
I see
it's
a lot of shaking
absolutely
heads.
going to be a public park. There's no, no public-private partnerships.
It's going to be New York City Park. Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Patrice.
Thank you. So I just wanted to turn back to a point that LT made earlier, and just kind of going over design priorities. I know it's kind of soon to kind of put this out there, but I do want to make mention that I do hope that the design includes elements of inclusive design as well, basically to mitigate some of the voids that we're currently seeing in the public realm. Like, for example, I'll just put it out there, like comfort stations, especially if you're considering like a linear park. At point A to point B, somewhere along the line, you have to use the restroom. So just want to make sure that like this is something that's under consideration, given that we're kind of seeing more and more editorials about this kind of going away. It's actually decreasing in our district. Like there are no public bathrooms. So kind of just raising that for just programming considerations. Obviously, they'll probably go under PDC review. But yeah, I think I'm likening this to Walkway over the Hudson, for example, where like at either end you have a spot where folks can go. So just kind of pointing that out there.
Okay, I have two more questions. The first one is in regards to bridges. When there was a study back in whatever year that was, the Big Sister study, where they basically put it together an estimate as to how much it would cost. One of the big pieces of that cost of that project is basically the bridges. They're freaking 75 years old, right? And so my question is, when you start, because we'll have two bridges involved here, I believe, maybe just one, the one, Metro, correct? Yeah, Union's a problem. She moved beyond, but it's Metro, correct? No, it's
over the Montauk Bridge.
Okay, that bridge. Okay, are you gonna be replacing that bridge? Okay, then because in part of my preparation, I read a lot of discussions online because I want to make sure, because this isn't a town hall, that I kind of represent questions that are coming from the community. And one of the questions that came from the community is from one of our big preservationists. And I guess on these bridges, I've not seen it myself, are these on the trestles, there's historic trestles, and I'm just going to read directly what they wrote, that are notable by the American Bridge Company. Are we looking to possibly preserve those and put them back into the design so that they sort of stay there as a historical figure, or no, they just go with the bridge? Or you've not even heard that? This is the first, the look on your face is saying, where did this come from? I'm hearing this for the first time. Why are you asking me this question? But I'm asking this question because it is a concern with some of the people. We do have a reasonable amount of people in this community that care about preservation. And my understanding is every bridge has got one of these. Like I said, I've not gone out and looked at one. So do you have an answer to that? Like, is that gonna come up in the environmental impact study, that, there are these landmark pieces?
Yes, that will.
Sorry.
This isn't something that I personally was aware of. It's certainly something we can take back to our design consultants and flag for them. Any items of historical interest will come up in our environmental review, and so we'll definitely keep that on our radar. It's my recollection, and the team can correct me if I'm misremembering, that the bridge in question that we're rebuilding, I think, basically doesn't exist anymore. So there's nothing to preserve.
It's the trestles at either end of the section
Okay.
that this issue will come up on.
Great, okay, so in the future, you can file that one away.
Well, I was just going to add that at the Parks Department, we do have a preservation officer, and we have an arts and antiquities office, and so should anything be discovered in the process of the environmental reviews that have to happen, we would certainly have those professionals with expertise think about that. And in other projects where it's been salvage of architectural remnants or infrastructural remnants, we've tried to incorporate those into projects wherever it makes sense and it's safe.
Okay, I'll bring you, can I just ask my second one? You know, I'm on my list. So my next question is basically to economic development, less design, more concept, data kind of stuff. Have you done any kind of study to sort of show what kind of economic development this will bring to the community? If so, could you share it with the community board? And has it been a comparative study that sort of shows the difference between the impact of, let's say, because again, you know, we've got these competing ideas. So has your study considered the competing ideas of, you know, rail versus, you know, the concept of a rail versus a park versus a combo package of like fries and a soda where you got the park and the, you know, has that study considered the economic impact of those three different ideas?
Thank you for that, Heather. Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and I can actually also take it back to our team as well, because my understanding is that at least at EDC, there hasn't been an economic sort of, I guess, like analysis of what kind of return we would see from having the Met Hub here versus anything else. And I think that really is, that is definitely kind of a crux in our, or one of the cruxes in our mission really, is to kind of see how this would play out in the neighborhood, economically speaking. So I think I can definitely, you know, bring that up, and we can potentially, if we do have those studies available, or kind of see how we can make something like that available. I do know though that you know, the MTA does its own study too for kind of like the economic output of their kinds of projects, so railways, and so that's definitely you know, something that we would lean on a little bit more as well, as kind of a point to as a point for feasibility, for example, right? Like MTA has their assessment, as I mentioned, and so you know, really, and since this is kind of like more in their ballpark, since the trains would be more in their ballpark, then I think we would definitely defer to them on any kind of like economic output for a railway.
Peter.
Thanks. Thanks. Actually, just to kind of pick up from Heather's question about the bridge, although that bridge isn't there, but there is old rail infrastructure, mostly torn up, bent, rusted. Any plans, because I know, and actually since Karen did, I should as well, now that I'm speaking again, I'm one of the original founders of Friends of the Queensway, formed one weekend morning over brunch at the old Shalimar Diner. But so I know Friends of the Queensway originally was looking to incorporate kind of industrial heritage elements into designs. Will any of that continue to be a design consideration for this section, to kind of, you know, make a place marker for what the history was to that space?
So as we said, we're still really in the early stages of design, and we're not quite at materiality yet for what the park will look like, but that's helpful feedback if that's something that the community is interested in seeing, and we welcome that type of information.
Thank you. So one more question as we kind of get into a little bit about the schematics, understanding that like it's still in design, it's still being explored, but I think we're hearing about the park itself, and we're hearing about like what is adjacent. Has there been any thoughts about the edge conditions? I feel like members of the community might be a little bit curious about what that means between a park and an adjacent property, be it a school or a private home. I'm curious if there's any kind of conceptual thoughts you can give us as to what that edge condition might be.
So again, we're still in this conceptual schematic phase, so we don't have fleshed out what those edge conditions will be. We are working with an existing site, especially in the northern half, which is much more elevated and has retaining walls, and so you can sort of imagine that in some areas it will still be like that, but especially in the southern portion between the Montauk line and Union Turnpike, we're still very much in the beginning phases. We don't even know yet what programming is going to be there, so we haven't gotten as far as what the edge conditions will be.
Typically, when we get capital plans like this, like for instance, when we got the Queens bus redesign, it was literally, you printed that puppy out, it was about like this big, right? And so you got the lay of the full land. And here, you know, for anyone that's been in the community, you know what the aspirations are of the Queensway. You know where it starts and it ends, and they've got these beautiful four phases that have been thought through. But you know, it is a challenge, I think, for us as a board when we're only seeing that one phase, and we're being, you know, shared with this one phase, and we have no idea where this leads. You know, when we think about the good question that Pedro asked tonight about biking infrastructure, and we hear the aspirations of students being able to use it, you pull up the bike map. I did real quickly, and what I thought was correct is correct. There is really not a decent bike path on either side, and so anything y'all can do to advocate for that, rock on, we're with you. We will be behind you all the way, because we're looking for biking infrastructure. We'd like to have a safer way to get our kids to school, a faster way to get our kids to school, because if they can get to school on bikes, that means mom and dad aren't in a car. So that would be a great thing. Well, yeah. And so, so thank you for, you know, talking about that as an idea. So that's been a challenge. And I do, you know, as an observation, you know, one of the things that I deeply appreciated, there was a wonderful letter given to the mayor shortly after he came in, where it talked about one of the benefits would be to the whole plan, basically, was that this would help us deal with the flooding that we've had, for example, in the other part of our community that would take the phase that's more along where the ballpark is, like where Kessel is and so on, and that's not going to be happening. And so I guess to me, I'm asking myself, since that wasn't selected and we went ahead with the Metro Hub, and we got a decent understanding tonight as to sort of why that makes sense. I'm sort of like wondering, you know, if that, because that was a huge benefit to our community, this like perpetual flooding that just happens with this ongoing storm. Like, what would be some of the benefits to this community of the Metro Hub project that is just as impactful as helping to rectify some of the flooding that we have in that area? I don't know if anyone can answer that or not.
Sorry, what was your question?
I guess the question is, you know, there were lots of benefits to like different phases, and so I'm asking, like, what are the major benefits to this community? You know, because the one thing that was raised and I thought was huge and so exciting was that if we were able to work on the phase that would include the ball field, which we're not at this stage, and y'all are hoping to get funding for that down the line, is that would have, doing that project would have probably lent itself to being able to help address, as that project was put together, the flooding that happens in the very immediate area that seems to just be repetitive, like during Ida, a whole chunk of that section. So I'm asking myself, you know, what are some of the benefits that are going to be for our community when the Metro Hub is put in, that you would characterize in your own opinion? This is completely, you know, editorial.
Primarily, like, top of mind for me is new park space. You know, I think we have a goal at the Parks Department to make sure that I think it's 85 or 90% of the population of the city are within a 10-minute walk to a park by 2030. And so every single acre, every single square feet of additional park space that we can add to the city helps us reach that goal. And it just extends the reach of the beauty of Forest Park further north into a neighborhood where you would have to walk a little bit further at Current to get into a park-like setting to enjoy the vast beauty of Forest Park. Whereas when this phase is started to build, it becomes a little bit closer. You know, the branches of that big beautiful tree that is Forest Park start to reach out and provide more greenery to the neighborhood. Also being working on so many greenway projects myself, The construction of a new segment of Greenway is always a big deal to me. Each little piece that we can build helps stitch together like a greater citywide Greenway network, which has so many benefits for recreation, for transportation, just to be able to get out and breathe some fresh air. I think as we all learned during COVID, how important just like going for a walk in a nice, quiet, green space can be, even if it isn't a massive, big, wide open park. So that's top of mind for me. I don't know if anyone else has any.
So by training, I'm a civil engineer. So the thing that I'm always looking for is where are we taking hard surface like a parking lot that Mitchell described at the beginning in the southern portion of our project, just north of Union Turnpike, and turning that into a green space that can be more of a sponge when we have these big rainstorms and create opportunities for green infrastructure. So that's anywhere there's an opportunity for that in the city, I think is a benefit.
And I just want to add, I don't think anyone would say that the current state of the property is great. You know, it's abandoned, illicit activities happen, there's boxes of cat food everywhere that people are, you know, feeding colonies of feral cats. So like, this isn't uses that I think any of us necessarily think are best for that space when we can create a public amenity instead, which is a huge win.
Questions from the board? Questions from the committee? Okay, I want to take some time now to take some questions from the public. Yeah. Thank you. We will take questions by raising hand. I will identify you by the color of top you are wearing. So hold on, I have got gray with glasses on top of the head. Yep, I do that all the time. That's how I live. I've got the black shirt with the green sweater, and then I've got Steve Strauss blue up front and black with purple. Okay.
Thank you for letting me speak. This is mostly for the Parks Department. An employee of the Friends of the Queensway told me that local residents who oppose the Queensway had cursed him when he led walks along their blocks. When I surmised that he must have gotten a welcome reception from the Parks Department, he corrected me. He said the Parks Department doesn't have adequate resources to maintain the parts of Forest Park that are currently used by the public, so it dreads stretching its resources even further to oversee a new trail. I believe that business interests and not recreational or environmental interests are the main driving forces of the Queensway. I believe that some real estate developers and local business owners would like to turn our quiet neighborhoods into another Manhattan. If Queensway supporters truly care about parks, I don't understand why they aren't prioritizing adequate funding for our existing parks. Park rangers complain about being underfunded and shorthanded. They continually ask the public to help them maintain and clean parks. While hiking in city parks, I've seen and photographed many disturbing things that are hidden from most of the public. My backyard is directly next to the proposed Queensway. I'm afraid that it will bring dangers to my backyard. You had mentioned that, oh, it will bring the park closer. I love Forest Park. During the pandemic, I was there all the time, hiking every inch of it. But I've seen things that probably no one here has seen. I have a couple of photos with me. I have many more photos, like altars with sacrificial altars with alcohol and food and dead birds, headless birds, many chickens around it. I've seen, and I have a photograph of a tree house made with branches from the tree. They cut down the trees from Forest Park. There was a fire pit next to it. There was cooking implements and knives, sheaths for knives. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I have a list of many more things. Public indecency. I'm a user and a lover of Forest Park. But I don't want this, I could go on, but I won't use up all the time.
Thank you.
I don't want it to come to my backyard. I'm glad that, I hope you make these planning sessions as soon as possible, because you said the Friends of the Queensway had handed you the plans. But I doubt that the Friends of the Queensway represents people like us who live right alongside there. So don't take their word for it. Please ask us.
Can I ask you a question, thinking about these planning sessions, how do y'all plan to, roll them out, like engage, like can folks like email our office and we can supply them to you so that they can get on some sort of distribution list so that they can actually opt into this process? Because it sounds like, for example, that she would probably like to opt into that process. Is that something we can do, to be fair?
Yeah, no, I think first and foremost, I'm so sorry that happens right in your backyard. That sounds absolutely.
Well, it happened in Forest Park, but that's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be literally in my backyard.
Yeah, it sounds terrifying, and I do hear you that it's obviously not something that you want to be waking up to, right? And I do want to again mention, I don't know exactly where you live along the is that like
right next to it?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. No. And so really, what we are envisioning for these more community touch points, as we've been talking about, is that opportunity for what programming looks like, right? What safety looks like, what kind of amenities can look like in this section. And so, and I guess to Heather's point, I think there could be some way to kind of, I guess, like give your input via email or like in writing, so that we can also take it back and really look through kind of where those kinds of opportunities could, or where people could possibly, do some sort of activity like that along that hub, and really kind of prevent and really just make sure that we can avoid that as much as possible. So
I'll just add and clarify, public input meetings will be open to the public, and if the community board gets names of people that you would like us to add as direct invitees, we can do that. We also plan to advertise through the community board, so we hope that you spread it to everybody, that you have a sign-in sheet here today. I assume that means everyone here is interested, and that means we would like your opinion at our public input meetings. So we can definitely work amongst the agencies and the community board to make sure that the message about the opportunity for public input is spread as wide as we can.
Okay, next up is black with green sweater.
Thank you so much. My name is Noel Hunter. I'm a part of QueensLink, speaking of the elephant in the room. And I just want to, thank you all for doing this presentation. It was very well thought out. And, we're huge lovers of parks as well. QueensLink's position is that, the programmatic benefits of having both rails and trails, are kind of beyond what we foresee here. But I want to ask specifically that since you mentioned that you are engaging with the MTA in the design process of this, now usually with other agency engagements in a project like this, you have a contract with them that specifies what kind of input they have. So my question is, what in your contract documents does it say? Is there any legal pathway for the MTA that requires you to incorporate their input in the project? In other words, is your consultation of the MTA for this project purely cordial, in the sense that, okay, we'll take your feedback into consideration, or is this simply, or is there a further legal requirement for you to take their design considerations into the project?
Thank you. There is no legal requirement for us to do the coordination with the MTA or take their input and incorporate it into our design, because the property is owned by the city and the MTA is not an agency of the city, and the Parks Department is not an agency of the state. So we are going to continue coordinating with them, but again, there's no requirement that we do so. It's just out of thoroughness.
I think some of this stems from, I was in a borough board meeting, this is September, where we were discussing, I got a big mouth, I'm raising two 16-year-olds, the question came up from other borough chairs within Queens who said, you know, we need to also not just be looking at IBX, we need to be looking at Queens Link. These are coming from people that are outside of our district, mostly to the south. And when they brought it up, the borough president said, he says, I've made my wishes clear that we want to see that the rail is kept so that should a time occur that we need to do some form of reactivation, we can do that without too much harm or any harm to the existing park that gets built. And that has been repeated many times, not just in that meeting. I've heard it, that's not the first time that I've heard it. So I think many of us hear this, and then we hear something that's kind of colored a little different, a little different of a shade. So I think it makes it hard for us to know what is what. You know, so I think the broader question would be, you know, in your design, will you be able to, despite the lack, and I understand, you can't, if there's no funding from the MTA for this, why would you take on the bandwidth to even consider it? We understand that, but the question becomes is if the borough president is saying, we'd like to see this line kept for reactivation, is that part of your consideration? Has that been a part of your conversations with the MTA that do as you will, but we need to ensure that this is preserved? Because I think, and I'm not trying to speak for you, forgive me, but I just know that I've heard that, and sometimes I'm like, okay, so what is it? Is it this? Is it that? Is it something else in the middle?
So our conversations with the MTA have been limited thus far. Earlier this year, we were mostly asking them for an update on their 20-year needs assessment, and of course that just came out, so we have that critical piece of information. Yeah. As soon as we have a schematic design ready to share and have other agencies review, that's what we're going to do, is we're going to talk to them and see what they think about our plan.
Thank you. And then next is blue, then it's purple and black, and then it's green.
Hi, I'm Steve Strauss. I live in Forest Hills. This whole issue of the Parks Department being able to maintain the park is a big concern. Unfortunately, our councilwoman has not decided to support 1% funding for parks, so she and the mayor and the rest of the city council are all partially responsible for the inadequate maintenance of our parks. I just wanted to ask the Parks Department if they've been looking at the 606 elevated park in Chicago, which is very similar to this kind of project, abandoned freight line through middle-class neighborhoods. It's not anything like the High Line. It's much simpler. And I would also suggest to the community board that you talk to the Trust for Public Land. Maybe they would fly 3 or 4 of you out to Chicago to take a hike on the 606, just to kind of get a sense of what a more normal elevated park is. It might be a narrower right-of-way than what I'm hearing here, but at least in parts, it's going to be very similar in the narrower parts.
So you don't consider the High Line to be comparable? You think the 606?
The High Line is not in any way comparable to this, I don't think, despite our fears of real estate interests. I really don't.
This is outside my wheelhouse, and I'm just going to ask questions so I can learn a little something tonight.
Please advocate your council members send the city agency to go look at whatever rail lines around the city, around the country that have been turned into parks, because I would love to see that. But as I mentioned earlier, there's precedents within New York City that have been built before on former rail lines, rail to trail type projects, and that are currently in design and construction right now. So we have things here that we can learn from as well. But as far as, I'm going to turn it over to Meredith at EDC, because she's the one managing the design team, and it would really be that design team looking at precedents. So what's the capacity, or what's the thoughts thus far about having them look into precedents?
I think, again, we're still in the early phases of this particular section, which is the first section. So I don't, off the top of my head, have precedents coming to mind for what the team has been looking at, but we can certainly have them bring that to our community engagement so we can talk as a group about precedents that seem appropriate here.
And I already have with the design team, and will continue to talk about the other precedents that are in the city that we're currently working on at parks and make sure that information and lessons learned about those projects can be shared with this one. So there's a bit of that already going on at a smaller scale that doesn't necessarily have to look to the other edge of the country.
And is anyone from the team familiar with the portion of federal law, I think it's 4F, that once this becomes an official city park, it will be very hard for the MTA to take back any of the property to build a transportation project, because basically transportation projects cannot be built through parkland without really extensive, difficult efforts, and most transportation agencies, rail and highway, try and avoid taking parkland for their projects because it's so difficult.
New York State has strong parkland protection laws, but those are state processes. The MTA is also a state agency, and there is a process to reclaim parkland to use for other uses when it's deemed that that is necessary and feasible, and replacement parkland is found in those instances.
Correct, but MTA would not build Queens Link without federal funding, and federal funding would not happen unless the federal people are satisfied that taking parkland is the only option for a potential rail line. So it's something the community board ought to look into. I also think this project, the Queens Link project, would not score very well with the federal government in the New Starts program, which is how this would probably be funded. So that's another thing you guys should consider in your balance, and get someone from MTA to talk to you about what the New Starts program is. That's basically the federal program, or the federal process for doing new rail lines. So Second Avenue Subway was in New Starts. The Interborough Express, if it happens, is in the New Starts program. Thanks.
Also, Steve, just so you know, our Parks Committee, Karen Kadesh, and if I've forgotten somebody, God forgive me, wrote a letter during budget season advocating for more than the 1%. We know it, we see it, we're asking for it, never hurts to ask for it, so just know that we understand it. Your point is very well taken by this board. We're right there with you. We need more money for parks, period, and we should have learned that after COVID, in my own personal opinion. Okay, next up is Black Purple, and then Green.
Black Purple. Hi, Doris Mackey from Alderton Street. Hi, guys. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
We want to get you on the recording.
Oh, recording, I'm sorry. So, the situation is, I'm on Alderton Street, down from Trader Joe's. Love my neighborhood. I'm a generational house owner. My grandparents owned the house prior to 1951. Okay, so yeah, so that means the house is really old. So I have two things going on. First of all, I love Metropolitan Avenue and trying to get home with 4 lights. So now you're gonna put construction stuff over there. How's that going to impede my getting home so I can get to the bathroom quickly? Because there are no public bathrooms. And it's very hard for me where I work. Number one. Number two, with that said, if you come down my block with this idea of a park, and you can literally stand on the hill and look into my daughter's back bedroom, ooh la la, I want to know how that's going to be protected. Because I'm afraid, I've already seen, because it's not just one high school, it's 3 high schools. I'm a middle school teacher. I know what happens in high schools. When we don't like something, we walk out. So now, how are you going to protect that kind of thing going on? Or somebody who falls, I mean, are you going to put like little railings or something so that they don't fall down the hill and then all of a sudden I'm liable? Or some people will decide that this is a nice campground, because I agree we should not have gates on our parks, but I'm in fear because there is no, and how are you going to get the trucks up there to get that stuff done? And I know this is all in the planning stage. And the other thing is, where's this hub going if you got a car wash on one side
In the ambulance, I mean, like, are you knocking down buildings? Are you taking away from those amenities? I mean, I just wanna know, are you gonna be able to notify people down on Alderton Street? Because we run parallel to Woodhaven, all the way down to like almost the LIE. So my question is, am I gonna get a notice about all the construction going on some way so that I can like reroute myself? Because our part of the street is one way, going down. It's not going up. So I just wanna make sure that I can get home on time. You know, I mean, I'm a very busy person, like the rest of us. On Alderton, I don't know where you are, but my side is the one-way side, between Metro and Yellowstone. You there, where are you? Yeah, you're a block away, you're a block south. So, you know, we're all concerned, and I got nature. I got over 50 years, if not more, because I'm well over 50, and we have nature, and I like my nature back there. I like my birds, I know people don't like the raccoons, but I like my nature. That's my quiet spot. So what are we doing to plan on that?
Thank you for your questions. We appreciate them, and it's certainly something that we are thinking about as we move through the design process and we begin bringing on a construction manager to help us think through how the construction will work. We'll continue coming back to this community board and engaging with the community as we get closer to construction about what our plans are for how we're going to build this park and move materials and trucks in and out, and how it will affect traffic patterns as we get closer to it.
And those let the community know, like, that block is like a major, I mean, even it's in like an ambulance run down that way.
Absolutely.
I mean, Forest Hills ambulance takes that block, and so do the police officers. I mean, like, that block is, constantly with the flashing lights, it's like such a great one. When they get someplace, that block is used tremendously, so.
It won't be impacted by this project, by the hub. That's south of what you're talking about.
Yes, it's south.
So, yeah. It starts at Metropolitan, but it doesn't cross over Metropolitan. The work will be to the south.
Okay, because you know, I'm getting a picture, because they're saying Mel's Drive, and I'm getting a picture, and then you're saying Stop and Shop, so I'm getting a picture that you're gonna be putting this hub like where the Home Depot and the car wash is.
Yeah, it goes between, right away between.
Yeah, I know, but I'm down that block.
There's no housing in that section. You're on the north side.
I'm on the north.
Yeah.
Okay. Because Alderton's where, I can walk up to Trader Joe's.
We'll eventually have to have this conversation when the next section gets done, but for this section, you're gonna be okay getting home.
I just wanna make sure, because I'm gonna tell you, it's a long drive from Long Island City.
But her concerns about like getting home, I think just go to our questions that when we get there, because we're asking a ton of early questions that it's clear tonight. But at least it helps.
But it's helpful to have them now, yes,
So now you know where our
absolutely.
heads are at. But I think to her point, you know, the disruption of construction, especially considering, and we cherish the Forest Hills Volunteer Ambulance Corps and their capacity to serve this community, because they're whippy when you need them, and so we want to be able to ensure that that continues. So I understand her concerns.
Even during the day.
Yeah, and just know that your concerns are valid, because even the High Line has been having some issues with that the Friends of the High Line have started taking on how to deal with some of the residents' concerns, because sometimes tourists just think it's cute to take a picture with someone's house, and that's just not so cute in Manhattan. Now, we're not gonna probably have that problem here, but your concerns about your thing, when we get there, to Peter's point, and we're not there right now.
Right,
But we'll continue to keep you looped in.
Even the construction, because I don't know if you've been down Metropolitan lately.
I have,
Con
just a
Ed
week
is
ago.
digging for gold, and, you know, and I can't get to my pharmacist. Okay, I can't get to my pharmacist, and she's limited on our hours. So if I can't get to my pharmacist, I can't get to, my other businesses that I support. You are in a neighborhood that most people look at me and I'm a spring chicken. So you got the elderly who can't get any place, and if they can't get to where they need to go, that's not helpful either.
Okay, I'm gonna hop to Karen, a board member, and then I'm going to hop back to Green. Thank you for your question.
Just one comment, a little bit in response to the.
Just one comment, a little bit in response to the public's comment, and Heather, for the board as well, to consider what the gentleman who is no longer sitting in the front row said earlier, but the comparisons to the High Line are really very limiting. And I think one maybe piece of information or a briefing that would be useful for this board and for the public would be to see what these kinds of rails to trails projects look like in communities that look a lot more like ours. And that includes everything from like, and I have these questions too, like how did a project that runs through a suburb manage a situation of people's windows abutting a pathway? This is not the first such project. The Atlanta project, Chicago, Philadelphia. Thank you, the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway, right here in the borough, have to contend with these issues. And I don't want to speak on behalf of Parks or EDC because their designs are, again, as we've heard 100 times today, are like early on. But I also think that it's a valid point to get educated on what those best practices are. Whether it's shading, lights, gates, fences, I don't even know what the limitations or scope are, but I think the point about tourists taking pictures in high-rise residentials on the High Line is probably a far cry from what we would see locally, and I would definitely advise Trust for Public Land coming to this board and helping to highlight some of those examples, because they are a national nonprofit that has spearheaded many of these parks. And I think if this board is going to take on, and the committee is going to take on the position of, being a good steward, then really understanding what these projects look like and not use the High Line as the only case in point, I think would be a benefit, and for the public to be aware of what those options look like as well.
Angie, when you gave Frank and I an initial presentation, you included a map that you didn't include tonight that I think is richly helpful in understanding. Can I show you on my screen? And you might have it on your laptop tonight, maybe you don't. But I think it would help them understand where it starts and where it finishes, because this is fabulous. Do you have that you could show?
I think I do have it.
Because that might help people really visualize. I'm a visual person, so I love pictures. And it shows right where it starts at Metro and right where it ends at Union, so that they would understand it's not going to bleed across the street.
Right, yeah, no, and so I think you're talking about the picture that was on this slide. So I actually had included, I switched out for images of the Vanderbilt Motor Parkway, kind of to give that sense of what the Met Hub could, essentially look like in terms of biking paths, running paths, walking paths. And so now that I'm thinking about it, I think in this deck at least, I had switched it out. I don't have it in this deck yet, and I'm not connected to the internet. So, but I do think, I agree though, Heather, that map would be really useful when we do come back. We can, all take a look at it and really kind of even get further into it, right? Like, we'll probably have it zoomed in on where the open space would be, and that way we can start to hear more of that feedback and more of that input of what kind of programming could be there. So I'll definitely have it up for our next touch points, so we can all take a look at that a little bit more closely.
Great. Next, three.
Hi, my name's Miriam Bensman. I live in North Richmond Hill, a few blocks south of Community Board 6 and Community Board 9. And my question really is whether any other communities are going to have a chance to have a say on this. And let me explain why. I mean, on the one hand, I understand, you were given an assignment to do this and you're designing the thing you were assigned to do. But from my perspective, the whole thing is surreal. And I love parks, and most of my vacations are spent on rail trails and the Adirondacks Park and places like that. But when this particular project suddenly appeared when in a secret budget negotiation with no public hearings, it directly affects everybody that lives from right here, where we're standing just about, or Queens Boulevard, all the way down to the Rockaways, and actually a lot of other people that have a whole lot of trouble getting through it, connecting parts of Queens. And there was no public discussion about the use of this property that engages all of those people. Now, that's not your fault. It's really the mayor's fault. It's Lynn Schulman's fault. But it's a huge issue, and it's not what they promised. So Jano Lieber, a year ago, said to me in a public forum held at the Queens Chamber of Commerce that he had talked to the mayor's office specifically about don't do anything that would block future transit development. We need every bit we can get. The transit guy in the governor's office, whose name I can't remember, Zardo or something, basically said, they said the same thing. And when the mayor's office was planning their nice press conference in the Home Depot parking lot, they called the local elected officials up and down the right-of-way and asked, what do you think? Do you want to come to this? And quite a few of them said, absolutely not. My community needs a train, and I don't want any damn park blocking the train. And they said, oh no, there's plenty of room, which actually there is, but we wouldn't do that. We'll design it so it won't block it. But now what you're doing is this incremental. You're building one piece of it where there are no immediate people living by, right in the middle. And then later, when that's fait accompli, then they can do it in another part, and all of a sudden we'll have this long park, which will probably be lovely, but and everybody will enjoy, and it will cost a lot of money. And then once people said, well, what about that train? Because you know what? New York City keeps growing, and we're going to build something, a lot of new housing or a convention center or whatever the hell it is, where Aqueduct is now, and we keep building these other things, and people need transit because they can't get there. Then they're going to say, oh, well, we have this new park, and we don't want to tear it up, and it's like squatters' rights. All the people that love the park will be against destroying it, understandably. So, I'm really saying this to everybody here. You guys aren't responsible for how this happened, but it really sucks.
Thank you so much for the feedback, for the input. And I do want to recognize that the Queens Link has done just as an extensive amount of advocacy and engagement in all of the different communities that a future railway would potentially hit.
And here.
And here, exactly.
And we did not hear much support from the park. I'm sure the Friends of the Queensway did have in the past. But just setting up a table at the Green Market can get 80 signatures in a couple of hours for people that want a train, and either want a train and a park, which is what we're proposing, or they don't want a park at all.
Yeah, no, and again, I think that engagement and that advocacy that you all as a collective continue to do really will help us, collect that feedback that I mentioned earlier, or that we've been mentioning this whole time, that we want to collect from every single pocket or every single community that this, not only that the Met Hub will hit, but any other future, whether it be a rail or another park along the former Long Island Railroad branch, is what we want to hear, is who we want to hear from, right? So I can definitely let you know now that we will be doing that outreach to all the different pockets, not just, the Forest Hill, Regal Park area where the Met Hub is closest to. We definitely want to expand this and get more voices in the room. And I'm happy that it's actually happening now, right? We're getting to hear from you all. We're getting to hear from, and I'm so sorry, I forgot your name, is Black and Purple Shirt, right? We're getting to hear from voices already. And we really appreciate you all again for coming out and really recognizing that there has been so much advocacy and engagement from both ends, and we want to continue hearing that and really taking it back to our team and really emphasizing that, whether it be through design or just like internal conversations that we have with our design and architect consultants, right? So again, really appreciate the comments, and I thank you for being here and sharing them with us.
Then I have, okay, Patrice and then Blue with glasses.
Just to respond to your point, ma'am, and I'm speaking solely for myself, not any, again, I'm on several committees, but I'm speaking for myself right now. Ideally, I feel like, why not have both? I would like a park and a train. Like that, I don't know how familiar you are with social media, but there's the meme with the little girl saying, why not both? That's my take on it, and that's what brought me here tonight. However, we do have to be realistic about funding. Right now, you have mentioned earlier that MTA is not at the table, and that does concern me as a member of the Transportation Street Safety Committee, that they're not at the table, because I think they need to be. And if they're going to build a railway, which would be beneficial to all of us, I would like to think, then they need to be at that table, and they need to bring money to the table to fund the project, not just their railway, but kick in something for a park. I mean, why not? Park is a good thing, and even before the pandemic, I realized the value of a park. Right now, there is no, I always found it ironic. I've lived in Regal Park for 5 years now, and the only park we really have is McDonald Park and Lost Battalion Hall, which is not really a park if you think about it. So my stance is, why not both?
And then we'll get to Blue with glasses. Sorry.
I just want to clarify one quick thing. So in a similar forum, we are going to also be hearing from Queenslink as well. So I think we do want to keep this open to all members of the community and all sides of the issue. Not that there's a side per se, because why not have both? But just know that folks are aware as part of this process, and why we even formed this committee is to really hear from these two competing projects and see what the outcome might be, as in terms of what the community would like to see. So with that, I want to go to Blue with glasses.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, I'm actually one of the people that was at the Shalimar Diner. I was one of the people who sort of suggested the name Queensway. And I just wanted to kind of circle back to that and say, my original impetus to be at the diner that day was I was looking for safe bike access to the park. It's really difficult to get to and from Forest Park. And it's true of almost all the parks in Queens. Like, Flushing Meadows Corona Park is surrounded by highways. And people will tell me on my bike, you should be riding in the park. How do I even get there? So that was like, it actually isn't Queenslink versus the Queensway, because this isn't the Queensway project. This is a Parks Department project that's very different, and it might have certainly had its roots in the Queensway, what was done with the Trust for Public Lands and the previous funding from the state. But I just wanted to sort of like raise that flag that Queensway wasn't about necessarily looking for a park. I mean, yes, having access to the green, to that space alongside the ball field, connecting into Forest Park would become sort of park space. It's particularly up in the Rego Park section by the Crescents. Right now, it's just kind of a wasteland in there, kind of creepy. But gosh, during COVID, if we could have already had access to this green space, I was so trapped in my apartment, and I have to leave the neighborhood to get to Parkland, you know? So I just wanted to remind people that for a lot of us, this was about transportation to Parkland, not exactly Parkland itself.
Thank you. I have Pedro, and then I have Travis Terry, that. And then the gentleman in the blue shirt. And then I think that will be it because I'm running up the clock here. So Pedro?
Okay, thank you. I guess we should read, because I mean, one thing that's happening here is that we keep talking about the Queens Link versus the Queensway, but we're not talking exactly what exactly it is that is going on and why we believe that one might be affecting the other. If you were to build a Queens Link, then you could, for example, do the cut and cover, where you just open up the land, build the tunnels, cover it up, and supposedly that's a lot cheaper than doing the borrowing, where all you do is borrow under it. There definitely is a concern here, which is that if you build a park, then you won't want to tear it up, which means that you're going to have to do the borrowing, kind of like what they're doing in Manhattan right now with the queue extensions. And that's a lot more expensive, which means that now you have an even less likely chance of getting the link. This is not really a question, I guess it's more of a comment for everyone to be aware of, that is kind of the issue that's going on right now, and what the concern of the Queens Link is.
But that's why MTA needs to be at the table.
I know, 100% agree.
Except I will say that, you know, yes, we're looking for an opinion from them, but some, and not all agree, that their recent, and this thing is not small, their recent 20-year capital plan sort of talks to their intentions. Now, whether or not that document is politically driven or not, I'm not here to say that. But we can only take them at their assessment at this point, and their assessment is in here. It's a big read. But maybe from a transportation angle, Keith and Peter can have a conversation and figure out what would be the best path forward to address some of the concerns that Latrice and others have raised tonight. I want to give, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to give Travis Terry, because I did say we'd give the public some time, and then the gentleman with the blue shirt, and then
Good evening, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak, Madam Chair. I just want to say I'm Travis Terry. Like Karen and Peter, I'm a member of Peter back in the day. I was at the original Shalimar Diner discussion as well to really envision what the Queensway would be. I want to thank the city. You've put in a tremendous amount of effort in thinking around this. And Portia, what you've done with Forest Park, absolutely incredible. Some of my favorite places in the world. I'm a Forest Hills resident. I have kids and family here. I love growing up in here, and I just want to say that this project means so much to so many people. I have personally, as have many members of the Friends of the Queensway, been to park cleanups where we have hundreds of people, been to schools. Starting from 2011, we've spoken with all sorts of community stakeholders, business members who are excited about this project to gather input. Our role in this was never to say what it should be. Our role was to facilitate a process. And it is immensely grateful to the city that they have listened to all the advocacy that's been done over the years. Look, I don't have much to say on a train that there has been a variety of different accusations that somehow we're trying to block that. That is completely untrue. There has been multiple studies over the last 60 years since this was abandoned. They're this thick of all the aspects, and for whatever reason, transit authorities have concluded not to fund those projects. And meanwhile, when we sit and talk to people in the PTAs and other areas of the community, we hear the same things over and over. Kids have no safe place to bike. It's incredibly difficult to get to Forest Park. I'm tired of seeing bad things happen up on this abandoned land, dumping, etc. And it's time to do something. And thanks to the Trust for Public Land, I just have to say, I think in the original Shalimar Diner, the first thing we all did as people living in the community was look at people and say, have you ever built a park? And everyone said, no, not really. So we really looked for a partner. And what they brought to the table, the process comments and listening extraordinary. And the way in which we were able to combine both community input within the planning process along with real expertise, civil engineers, landscape architects, traffic engineers, lighting consultants, and everything else to create the product that is the Queensway is something that I just want to say I'm really excited about. And you can find more information about what we had planned. I know that we're kind of restarting that because rightfully so, the city is taking the time to really engage communities. But it's on a website called thequeensway.org. There's also a really great video that we put together on YouTube that you can take a look at through the trust public land that sort of walks through a lot of the benefits of what could happen. So I just want to say finally just to the community board, I think a lot of the questions that you're raising are really good ones. And I know the city is paying attention, and to the extent we as community folks could be involved in helping making sure that this is done the right way, we're 1,000% in. And again, I just want to thank all the various stakeholders in this conversation. It's just nice to see, you know, so many of the times the conversation has been looking at what other communities are getting. You know, last week, the west side of Manhattan got a $73 million beach that you can't even get into the water. So for our community to attract this type of investment by the mayor is incredible, and I just want to say thank you again. And to the elected officials, I think Lynn Shulman has been phenomenal on this. Personally, I think the borough president has been phenomenal on this. And I think they have really sort of took an active voice on it all. So I just want to express my appreciation and look forward to further conversations and to be as helpful as we can as an organization. Thank you.
We're winding down now. It's at 9:07. We have about 8 more minutes. So.
Mine should be really quick. Thank you. For the record, the new beach is very nice. You should go to it.
I like that they're doing all that stuff.
So mostly had like a logistical question for the follow-up, and sort of what people's expectations should be about the level of feedback that you are willing to accept and engage with. And I think part of what I'm like listening to everybody else, part of what I'm hearing is sort of existential or really fundamental feedback about whether to do it, the nature of it, like whether it can be replaced at some point in the future. And what I hear you guys saying is sort of more tactical or like elements of the park design, which facilities to have, which programming to have, and that's obviously really useful feedback. But I guess for the community, I'm just curious whether you will actually engage on the more fundamental questions, or whether you really want to focus the process on the how to do it as opposed to whether to do it. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that's a really important distinction as well. As I mentioned in the presentation, what we're working on right now is to bring the MedHub design up to city and park standards, right? We want to make sure that they can operate and maintain this park when it gets built out. And so it's really important for us to hear, on one end, what people want to see, what kind of, as this gentleman mentioned, what kind of programming, what kind of amenities, things that are feasible and reasonable, and again, that can be maintained by Parks and Rec. And I think to the more fundamental question, as Mitchell pointed out, while our talks with the MTA have been, more so on information related to kind of their assessment and their review and their process, really, I think based on this input that we're getting just from the beginning, we can definitely, start to see and use this as kind of a takeaway as to how to, I want to say, better answer that fundamental question. I'm not sure if there is a very, very clear, yes or no to can we, really eventually include a railway, or will this even be looked at eventually? You know, I think right now, since we are at very preliminary stages of design, and we have, you know, just recently got an architect, a landscape architect and a design consultant, we want to take this and use it to really get to that final design, but also continue to answer those questions of, you know, like what the future will look like, whether that be parks or rail.
That's smart.
So I hear a lot of people love parks. So people have a wonderful opportunity this Sunday from 11 to 2 at Yellowstone Park. No, why not? I mean, everybody's saying how much we love parks. So I just want to say from 11 to 2, there's going to be an activity at Yellowstone Park where you could do your bench painting. You can also bring your kids and you can do birdhouse. So this is an opportunity to actually support a current park. So we're talking about building a new one, might as well support our current ones. Thank you.
Okay. You're in the nodding spot for that. I have one more question from Michael Carlier, he's from the VP's office. Do you mind, Thank you. And this is the last question.
Hi all, thanks. My name's Michael. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Parks and Transit Liaison for the Queensborough Presidents, so of course I'm here. So first of all, thank you to EDC, thank you to the Parks Department for, you know, you guys do tremendous work as I have seen in my role, but thank you to CB6 as well. But just to get into the grand scale of things, we have a lot of diverse opinions here in this room, so you can only imagine what the several communities along the right-of-way. It's a whole complex conversation, but this land is abandoned and decrepit. So at the end of the day, this development is gonna be a net positive for the community. So just something to keep in mind of that going forward. But how we get there and how big we go with this project, as it is being done piecemeal, as that's the economic reality of dealing with city budgets, state budgets, and all that, but just a lot of those concerns that we've heard tonight, quality of life, disruption through the construction efforts. You know, our office is hearing that. We're gonna continue working with you guys to make sure those are addressed. But just from the borough president's position, he has been consistent when he says, we do like the trails, but we also love rails. So if there's a way that we can move forward with this process with EDC, with the Parks Department, loop in MTA more into that conversation on these public concerns that we're hearing tonight, you know, as we keep going, I really want to see what the public input section of this is going to be going forward, because, you know, this is a great start. Obviously, we need to expand this to not just CB6, but the other community boards, as given this project is occurring here, but this right away does go down to CB9, to the Rockaways, as well as just increasing transit throughout the city overall. So just definitely looking forward to continuing that conversation, but I do just want to hear a little bit more about the public input section plans that you have going forward into the next couple of weeks and months, as well as outreach to the local elected officials, because even on our elected side, there's a lot of different opinions. So if you guys could speak more to that, but definitely do appreciate the efforts you're putting in here tonight and beyond.
So we're still developing exactly what the public input meetings will look like, but in general, it's going to follow the process and the standards that Parks Department uses for all of our public scoping input meetings whenever we're building a new park anywhere. And that includes outreach to the borough presidents, the community boards involved, etc. It involves outreach to any known advocacy, friends of parks groups that are nearby, etc. And as mentioned earlier, hopefully there can be a collection of emails from this meeting that's shared with us, so we can make sure that everyone that's here tonight has a direct invite to those meetings as well. But yeah, we'd certainly be coordinating with the council member's office or the borough president's office, et cetera, to get the reach and the word about the public input meetings as far and wide as we can.
So I just want to thank everyone for the conversation tonight. I think this is entirely the main reason why we formed this committee, just to be able to kind of like have the public come out and actually just have a real conversation on this. I think you heard a number of things about, how we can consider the possible integration of both parks and rails. Maybe that's one of the big takeaways of this evening. I just want to take a moment to thank Parks and EDC for joining us tonight and the presentation. I'm definitely looking forward to the conversation and the outreach, so do be in touch with the community board as to when that might be scheduled, and we'll be sure to disseminate it to the public so we can have more of these conversations. I think with that, we're good for the evening. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Okay, second, and we're good. All right. So thank you, everyone.